To me, it's self-awareness, awareness, and the penny drop moment. And I call that a bias to awareness. Okay, we're always trying to be more self-aware. But with it, the critical and maybe even more important part is the second bit, which is bias to action. Now, we can have all the awareness we want, but if we are not going to take those small steps forward and act, then it doesn't get anywhere. So so one of the big life design philosophies in my personal experience, I would say, is whatever it is, the analogy again is, if you don't swing the bat, there you're not putting runs on the board. So we can keep analyzing the ball and the pitch and the conditions, but then we should not, then you're a Harsha Bhogle, you're not a Virat Kohli. And therefore, so they do their study, they work on the nets, they look at their videos, but finally value gets created through action.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Second Innings podcast series. Suman, Ghosh, and I are your hosts as usual today. Purpose, passion, joy are becoming more and more important to all of us in our life and work journeys. Many of us are doing this through rediscovering ourselves by changing tracks in our lives to a second innings, to a different transitionary career. In this podcast, we explore through conversations with people who have done such transitions. We uncover their stories, experiences, and learnings. Most importantly, telling and listening to such stories helps all of us as well as hopefully people who are listening to us today. We have another special guest with us today, Navyug Mohnot. Navyug is someone who has spent a lot of his time and effort in the past few years in discovering and helping people design their lives. More of that in our chat coming up. He's going to talk about that, of course. Navyug is the CEO of QAI, a transnational process improvement consulting organization, and the founder and CEO of QGLUE, a consulting, coaching, and training company that helps enterprises and individuals adopt and embrace the design led way. Navyug's passion for all things design led him serendipitously to the celebrated Stanford School book and offering Designing Your Life. I stand corrected. Navyug is a Stanford trained DYL coach, facilitator, and educator for universities, and brought the renowned program to India for the first time as a visiting faculty at Ashoka University and at the Indian School of Business. Prior to all of this, Navyug did his BTech from IIT Delhi and has received the Outstanding Contribution to National Development Award from the IIT Delhi Alumni Association. He pursued a fellowship for a PhD program in the USA. He dropped out to pursue his dream of returning to contribute to the globalization of the then nascent Indian IT industry. He's done some really exciting stuff. I've personally been through his DYL program and I strongly recommend it. I think it's one of the best 2 days I've spent learning, sharing, also contributing to people around me. It was a great program. Thank you so much, Navyug, for that, as well as thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to learning from you again over the next couple of hours.
Thank you, Atul. Thank you, Suman. Delighted to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you with us. So, Navyug, let's start. You know what we do on the episode typically to begin with is we ask our guests, we request you to just share your what we call the origin story, your younger years, what shaped you as a young guy, growing up wherever you were growing up, your siblings, your friends, your parents, all of that. Would love to hear your early years story.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Let me rewind back to the childhood years. My father was with the United Nations, and that took me at a young age, when I was 7 years old or something like that, to various countries where he would visit as a United Nations economic development expert. And in that, we were located for several years in Saudi Arabia. And you can imagine Saudi Arabia, I don't know, 35, 40 years ago. It was quite an experience. But that also meant that I had, at a very young age, the opportunity to really travel the world and see the world. And I don't know how my dad did this. There was no internet, of course, but this is the year, you know, in the early 70s, we're visiting Nice in the south of France and sitting on the beach in Nice. And when I look back, even today, it's really one of those cities which are gems, but everyone will go to Paris. And so I had this wonderful experience studying in an American school in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and these wonderful experiences, traveling the world with him, and looking at different cultures, experiencing Europe, but also experiencing um, a culture such as the Saudi culture, decades ago, which was extremely, extremely, what should I say, strict, to say the least. So these were some of the formative years, and helped to for me to look at things. And then when we decided to come back to India, I joined a school in Delhi, and my parents, and once we went there, there was something called Delhi Public School RK Puram, which was just starting. And at that time, RK Puram was, the classes were tents, and there was the main school in Mathura Road, which was the building. And I said, no, I want to go to the one which has tents. And my dad and my mom, well, especially my father, he's always allowed us to do what we want to do. And I think that's been so definitive in the way I've grown up. And he said, you want to join the school which has got tents? So be it. So who knew DPS RK Puram would then go on to become the flagship school of the DPS chain. And I had an amazing time. But for the first few years, I was in a set of tents in this school called DPS. Your aunt, your uncle, your mother, your father, and everyone around you would say, beta, I mean, uh, study hard and study hard and study hard and get to IIT. So I studied hard and got to IIT, and only to realize it wasn't what was like gonna be extremely energizing to me. So I realized early on that I wasn't an engineer at heart. Having said that, I think the most amazing, most valuable 5 years of my lives were the 5 years. In those days, IIT was 5 years. I didn't particularly enjoy engineering, but it shaped me. And the kind of people you meet is amazing, and the kind of freedom it gives you was amazing. And I started dabbling with the arts, with design, with architecture, with copywriting, with filmmaking. And IIT was this, a paid holiday in which you don't have to pay anyone anything. You just as living in that bubble and this lovely platform. So these were some of the early years. And then, of course, life happened and one kept going, and from IIT to USA and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah.
That's very interesting. How old were you, Navyug, when you came to India and joined
I,
DPS?
I would have been exactly 11 years old. Yeah, 11. And
Wow. Wow.
so,
Okay.
yeah,
Very, very young. I mean,
very young.
decide to do tents at 11 would have been a very interesting decision. And for your parents to, let you do what you wanted when you
Yeah,
were 11 is quite commendable. I mean, my son is going to be 11 in June, and I'm not sure if he decides to go to a school in tents, what my reaction is going to be.
I know.
So that's very interesting. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And okay.
But Atul, if you notice with some of our other speakers as well, guests as well, that one common theme which I recognize is while they were worried as to how their parents would take it, the fathers would say, go ahead and do what you want to do. And I think that's had a huge impact on a lot of people. Because
Yeah.
typically the parents would like to steer their children right in a certain direction. And that's what happens even today.
Yeah.
And I think the best testimony to that is that everybody ends up being an engineer, almost everyone, right? And at
Yeah.
some point, you
Yeah.
realize that maybe, like Navyug said, I'm not an engineer at heart, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's
You're
pretty fascinating.
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. There is definitely a common thread of a lot of people who've been talking to us who were their parents. And Suman, you've actually highlighted it quite correctly, that it's often the fathers. And
Yeah,
I'm not, which I'm not saying mothers don't give the freedom. I'm just saying everybody mentions my father. Maybe
yeah.
that's just the patriarchalness of the families at that time, a couple of decades ago. Maybe that's the way it was. But yeah, that's an interesting observation.
And it's
Yeah.
a very interesting balance of being engaged. That's what I learned from him. I wish I could have taken some of those qualities for me and my children, and I think I probably failed horribly. But it takes restraint. It
Mm.
the balancing act of being completely engaged and being completely disengaged. And I don't know how he would manage that magic, because it wasn't that he was not around. I mean, totally around, yet not interfering in the decisions. And to some extent, I think, and we'll talk about designing your life and this sort of sense of agency, and the sense of finding your own path forward. Then one fine day I came and I said, I have a fellowship from a US university and I'm going to USA. And he said, good. And, he didn't know where I was applying. And so I've seen these two extremes, and I'm not passing any judgment. I'm not saying this is good or that's bad. All I'm saying is this is how I grew up. Um, Perhaps it worked well for me, perhaps not. I don't know. All I know is he just let us be. And
I think it definitely has an impact on where you ended up, which track you ended up on in life.
yeah,
Certainly does, and I think it, like you said, your words that it's done well for you, and that's
yeah,
what matters, right?
yeah,
That's at the end of the day what, and you're happy having had that freedom, and I think that's showing in a lot of the stuff that you're doing, have done in the last 3 decades. And I think let's talk about that a little bit as we go along. When if I mean you're a career entrepreneur. You When is it then in your growing up years that you decided that you, because IIT fellowship, it sounds like a perfect recipe
yeah,
for doing a job somewhere or something.
yeah.
I'm talking about the 80s and the 90s. We're not talking about today. It's different
Yeah.
today. So when was it that it kind of struck you?
It's by accident, and yet, there are no accidents in the world, and yet it was by accident. So let me explain. So I was going with the social narratives that are around, and I was going, I won't even say with the flow, but I was being swept by the flow, like a lot of us, or us as in my age group, we were at that time. And so I was in IIT, and then that social narrative was, and everyone, it was cool to go to USA. So I was going to USA. It was cool to, and the right thing, and the dumb thing to do your PhD in USA. So I applied for a PhD. I did know that, well, here's the interesting thing. I said, I don't want to spend another 5 years doing a PhD after 5 years of engineering. So I'm going to apply for an MBA. And I applied for, and everyone said, you won't get aid for an MBA program in US. And obviously, we were not going to spend, even in those days, 50, 60, 70 lakhs, God knows how much it was, some obscene amount. So I said, no, I will get it. So I applied to 6 MBA schools and 1 PhD program. And guess what? I got 0 aid from the 6 MBA schools, and I got that 1 PhD program. And this PhD program also, I have to tell you this, Atul and Suman, that form, I was walking down the corridor in IIT, and my friend said, I'm cleaning up my room, take this form. I said, I'm not applying for PhD programs. He said, just read it. I mean, I'm throwing it anyways. So I took that. It was interesting because PhD programs in USA can be, cross-disciplinary and very exciting. So 6 MBAs got applications, 1 PhD, 0 MBA aids, 1 fellowship from a PhD program. And guess where I was doing a PhD? And once again, it was, and I'll just come to your question about when I became an entrepreneur. I was training to be an academic and do a PhD, and everyone around me were, passing out and joining universities as professors and being academic. And I was enjoying that. I mean, I enjoyed it till I passed my 2 years, my qualifying exams and everything else, and I lost my mom. And I told the university that I'm going to go back to India and spend some time with my dad, and then I'll come back. And I didn't know what I was going to do. So I just looked around, and that's another whole story, and found this company called QAI, which was a world leader in the process consulting space. And that's another whole story. But I said, well, I started working with them in India, and I thought I'd do it for a year, and just to kill time, be with my dad and go back and finish my PhD. But that's when things really lit up for me. And being an entrepreneur was exciting. We didn't call it a startup then, but it was a startup. It was a garage operation. It was with this American firm. India's IT industry was starting to happen, and we joined the gold rush not by being another IT company, but the company that provides the pots and pans to the companies which are in the gold rush. And so we started doing consulting to the IT firms, and I totally enjoyed building something, hiring, strategy, the communications, everything. And so I never went back to finish my PhD. So that 1 year gap year, which happened by accident, and when I found QAI by accident, and I lost my mom, which was not on the cards, and this one gap year in India, and life went a whole different direction. And ever since, I've been running this, and enjoying the freedom of being an entrepreneur. So
That's
it
great.
did happen by accident in a lot of ways, and yet, and
Hmm.
I am a true believer that in life there are no accidents.
So Navyug, tell us a little bit more. I mean, this twice you mentioned that there are no accidents in life. Uh, just elaborate on that. What does it mean?
Well, at two levels. One is the spiritual level, and at
Hmm.
some level, maybe we're in the matrix. Maybe there's a higher power. Maybe there's something already written for us, and it looks like we've managed to get things done our way, but it's preordained. That's one point of view. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that I'm a huge believer of that, but at the back of my mind there is some thoughts around it. The other is that I just believe that um we get lucky because we swing the bat a lot more than maybe what's required. By which I mean, the more you preparation meets opportunity, eh, the more lucky you get, the more accidents seem to happen. I have this whole theory called, are you collisionable? That means, do you collide with ideas a lot more than on average? Do you collide and you put yourself up for collisions with people? Are you open to, and are you in some way fashioning how you move ahead, so that you would have more collisions with opportunities, and then serendipity does happen, which in hindsight looks like accident, but it is somewhat, I believe, intuitive, maybe at times not by design, sometimes by design, but we are just increasing the probability of accidents to happen by doing things both subconsciously and consciously.
So what seems as luck is not so much luck. It's actually a lot of skill,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
Let's talk a bit about accidents. Some people believe that some people don't believe in accidents. They're very clear. This is what I want to do.
yeah,
In their mind, they're very decisive, right? And some people are like they go with the flow, right? And I think your story was more like that.
yeah,
Okay, you are not being very decisive that I have to do an MBA
yeah,
or I have to do a PhD. You went with the flow. You got admission from both. You went there, and then QAI happened, not by accident.
yeah,
And then you
yeah,
just decided not to go back to your PhD.
yeah.
So how does one balance this? Uh, what people feel, one might feel as being decisive, which could also be rigidity,
Yes.
and versus being fluid and always open to new opportunities. So where do you think that balance should be or could be?
Right. No, that's a wonderful question, and I think about it often. And designing your life talks about it, the framework as well. And and no, you can't be either A or B. If one is always fluid, I think that's a problem. If one is super planned and very clear and definitive, that's a problem. So again, the magic is the ability to toggle between the two. Now, the way I see it is that directionally, one has to be pretty clear directionally. So to, and that goes back to some extent to your values. For me, autonomy is very important. To me, impact is very important. To me, creativity is, these are values. Now, directionally, I would do things which would, feed these values or feed the soul, and not be out of coherence, as we call it. But in the detail, whether it would take this shape or that shape or this practice or that endeavor, one would let life evolve. So I think there is no magic or silver bullet or a framework, but what one should, my personal experience, what has worked for me is directionally, I know what lights me up and what I enjoy and what energizes me, and what elements need to be in whichever endeavor I'm taking. And given that, one's open. And I've been, and most of these things have happened in my life because of just pure openness. I've just been open to stuff. So even I'll tell you, when I was in the PhD program in USA, and here's another interesting story, which I would love to share with you. I reached for the PhD program in management at the University of Rochester, and they said you have to come 1 month early to do some foundational mathematics courses. And I get there, and the math courses are so difficult that here I am after 5 years of engineering at IIT in India. I have tears in my eyes. And I said, what the F? And I said, I can't do this. And then a professor, Chaim Mendelssohn, eminent professor, one day comes and says, I'm starting a new stream called Information Systems Economics. And who's interested? I just said I am, because I wanted to get out of this. And he had explained it a little bit. It sounded interesting. My father's an economist, so I just said, oh, I've never done economics. Let me see. And he said, there's just one problem. There is no textbook. We will define the space. A new area called information systems economics, which marries pure microeconomic theory with information systems. And I said, wow. So I just took it. Now the first class, and I'll quickly finish the story, he comes and he says, and I don't know a demand curve from a supply curve. I'm an engineer. And he says, here are a set of papers you have to read. And you know what that was? 12 stapled papers by 12 Nobel laureates in economics. And I said, oh my goodness. Now, the prep or the mental resilience that IIT gives you was very handy here. And I just went right all into economics. And guess what? It's the more I've enjoyed amongst all the subjects I've studied in my life, I've enjoyed it the most. So it also just happened. I would have never even discovered the whole area of microeconomic theory and reading Nobel Prize winners, which was so energizing. So directionally, I wanted to do a few things, but I got lucky at times, but things happened. So I don't even know. I just, it's instinct. Sometimes you take it, sometimes you don't take it. But more often than not, I'm a votary of take it and try. And because you can always retract. See, I came to India for that year, did the venture. I could go back to finish my PhD. They would take me back. What the hell? Let me try 1 year of being on my own. And well, it worked. I never went back. So,
Suman,
votary of take it.
Suman sounds familiar, no?
Absolutely.
The why not thing again.
Yes, absolutely. So
You
that
know,
was a lovely story, Navyug. And
really.
I think, of course, this was also a story of luck that this professor started this.
Yeah.
But it's also about putting your hands up, right? Not too many people put their hands up for that course, so
Yeah,
that's also important. Yeah,
it
yeah,
is.
it's
Yeah.
grabbing
I
that.
I just grabbed it to see how it would go.
Yeah.
If not, we'll
Couple
continue.
of things I'm just going to jump into, Navyug. I really like, a few minutes ago you used the line, "Are you collisionable?" And I thought that was really, really. I mean, there's so much in that statement in question, and in that is also the why not thing, and that's something Suman and I have discussed with several guests, that when you typically are faced with an opportunity, very often you ask yourself, why should I do this? For example, if I want to go for a conference, why should I attend this conference? What will I get out of it? But the better question to ask, to be collisionable, to use your term, is why not? Let me just go out there, meet five people, or meet nobody. That's
Yeah,
how you become collisionable. I'm going to use that term a lot, by the way.
yeah, yeah.
I really like it. The second thing I just wanted to, you mentioned a few minutes ago again about uh, you are keenly aware, self-aware about what are the things that trigger you, what are the things that light you up, I think is what the term you used.
Yep.
um, how do you get that self-awareness? Because it's for a typical listener, he or she is saying that, what, how do I know what, I mean.
The only way is to, again, get curious, put yourself out there, and just notice your energy and notice even the people that you want to hang out with. Just notice, start noticing. And that's what I like about design and designers, and why I'm such a fan of design and designers and design thinking is, that's a superpower of designers. They notice, they look at stuff, they reflect on it in the moment. So I think we all, at some level, and that's the message, and that's what I'm trying to say to through designing your life, is we are designers, but can we sharpen that skill, the sense making skill? And it doesn't have to be complicated or pedantic or too theoretical, but we all go through life. But I just think that, do we do enough of pause and reflect? Do we do some amount of sense making? And do we just notice what's energizing us, what's putting us in states of engagement and flow? And energy, engagement, and flow are the road signs as you're going on this highway called life, which will give you the indicator of whether you should go straight and take an exit 4 miles later, or should you take the exit now. And so the road sign on this highway is energy, engagement, and flow. And it's really as simple as that. If it energizes you, engages you, and puts you in states of flow, it's probably right for you, probably. And
When do you think you develop this kind of ability to reflect? I mean, going with your story, even from your childhood days, you said, the Saudi Arabia experience. So maybe it was always there, but the way you articulated it, that my values, not too many of us think in those terms, right? That my value is autonomy or my value is creativity.
yeah,
Like somebody in our show said, I quickly realized that I can't work with a boss. That's a nice way of saying autonomy is a huge thing for him, right? But they don't articulate it that way, right? um,
Mhm.
in fact, I was just reading this Whole New Mind, reading it again. Daniel Pink, he talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and I
so
can now relate to that. So I can kind of resonate with that now.
I hear you. And I'm probably retrofitting and saying these are my values.
Yeah,
When I
yeah.
was doing it, I probably
Mm,
hadn't thought it through.
yeah.
I think, so here's my deal. I just think, now one is teaching, and so one has got far more rigorous in one's analysis and so on, and I can pinpoint my
Yes.
values. I've done the exercises myself, on myself, da, 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 da. But I don't think it starts with any of us that. So what we'll just go back to that, that phrase of, trust your gut kind of a thing. And maybe it's just as simple as that. The thing is, given our educational system, our analytical minds, our affinity for logic, and also to be accountable and answerable to our elders, perhaps we don't trust our gut that much. Perhaps we don't take as many chances because our gut is saying so. But as now behavioral science and neuroscience and everything else have shown us scientifically, that emotions is a huge part of the data and information that we have, which will lead to better decision making. But that's of late. I think in the past, if you talked about energy or emotion, that was not a great input for your decision making. Logic was, and the left brain and rational, logical side of you was. So I think that's changing for me, maybe because, like I said, my father just said, do your thing. That was a nudge. That was a very subtle nudge to say, okay, trust your gut and take a
Yeah.
chance. Maybe it's that. I don't know. I don't know where it goes back to, but I've just taken those chances and followed my gut.
But I think one big takeaway from this conversation we just had for myself, and I'm sure for our viewers also, is that maybe we should start thinking of our values, right?
Yeah,
As opposed to what is it that I want to do, right? Because once you know what your values are,
yeah,
um, even when you take a job, there may be certain parts of the job which kind of doesn't gel with your values, right? So
yeah.
then you can work through them, and then the values will decide whether you take this exit, fourth one, or maybe never take an exit.
And Suman, you put it interestingly about values, and we've spoken about identity a lot. And one of the one of the reasons that a lot of people don't make a transition is because of the strong identity they have with what they are doing. In this whole transitionary period, I've started thinking more in terms of, I identify myself not by what I do, but why I do it. And that's a very interesting reframing that I've been doing in the last few months. Because it, the what I've found very often took me down a different path rather than the why. Now, the why ends up at the what a little bit, undoubtedly. But I think that nuance of difference is an interesting one.
Yeah,
No, I have found it very useful as well, because I did a little bit of digging around. So essentially, your values, we have a whole bunch of values, and we all relate to those values. But what's important is the hierarchy of values. What's more
yes,
important, isn't it?
yes, yes,
And I think that itself requires a fair bit of self-reflection.
yes. One, a 20-minute exercise we do in our classes, and it's there are around 50 values. It's a deck of cards, and it's researched, so it comes from some lab. So I'm not getting into that, but people just have to put three stacks: very important, important, and not so important. And now the very important will end up having 10 or 15 out of those 50, 60 values. Now comes the crunch thing. Out of 15, we ask them to say your 5 core values. Now they struggle a bit. And in 20 minutes, a lot happens actually. Now they come down to the 5. Now we ask them that these are your core values, but surely you've also had conflict between core value 1 and core value 2, even though they're the most important ones for you, the core values. And then we look at incidents in life to see when one was, at tension with the other. And but if we are aware that this is a core 1 and this is core 2, but we'll reconcile them in this situation, it's just a little more peaceful. So I would highly recommend that.
The other thing that I think that has appears to have worked really well for you, Navyug, is that you've just taken a swing of the bat whenever you had an opportunity to, right? Now, obviously, that's again part of the collisionable thing, that the more swings of the bat you take, the more times the chances are you're going to hit the ball out of the park or whatever. Can I ask you to think a little bit about and maybe share a few experiences or stories about when you swung your bat and it didn't work for you, even though you may have hit the ball
Yeah,
or even though you may have missed, because
yeah,
missing is part of the journey of hitting and winning as well.
sure. No, I hear you. And one has failed so many times. And for sure, and I'll share some incidents with you, but and I tell my team also this, that it's fine, a Virat Kohli or a Tendulkar or the top of the game person, what's their batting average in the 50s, and they're gods of that game. So it's the batting average that counts. It's not like every swing, or that famous reel that's going around, I think, of Federer, right? And he talks about he's one of the greatest guys. I mean,
Just
what's
like
it?
that.
The total number of points that he's won is just 52% of the points he's played. And that
Ridiculous. I mean, I fell off my chair when I saw that, heard that number. I was like, my God, world number one, absolute legend.
legend,
And
GOAT,
the difference is 52%. I mean,
that's it.
it's unimaginable.
So
It's
that's
crazy.
a philosophy that I think is extremely empowering if people would internalize. And I believe a lot in swinging the bat, and knowing that you'll only win 52%.
So somebody who's watching this and who's starting out on a different journey, is there something that you can advise them on as to how they can avoid uh,
Yeah.
some of those pitfalls, or do you think it's just par for the course that one has to experience it?
You know, Here's again another theory or view that I have, and that is that, you know, everything, the magic or the fun is in the paradox, in the and, in the both. Now, and therefore, should you swing your bat? Yes, you should. Should you be focused? Yes, you should. And I've grappled with that all my life because I'm convinced you should do this and this. And therefore, I'm not going to go the path of saying be focused and just um be anal and stick to the knittings, and there are enough evidence to say that being focused is very valuable. I think there's enough evidence to say that, you know if you're in the market of possibility and ideas and inventing the future, then you have to swing your bat and take more risks and try stuff and see how it goes. So in summary, I would say, you know it depends on context, depends on person, depends on the structure of the industry, depends on the vocation, whatever it is. There'll be different degrees of of exploration versus exploitation. Now, in any industry, you first explore, and then once you've hit upon what they call product market fit of some kind, then you exploit, which means you scale and you milk it and you make your profits. If you're exploring all the time, it's a problem. If you're starting from day one and just wanting to optimize, it's a problem. And companies have to do cycles, or teams have to do cycles of exploration versus exploitation. In life, we have to do exploration versus, you can't, you have to double down at stuff. You also have to keep exploring. For me personally, that's just who I am. If I keep on doubling down and exploiting or optimizing, I find it boring. Now, I think I would have done better had I done that. I would have made more money had I done that. Had I focused for a longer period on some certain things, I would have probably created greater scale and profits and all that. But I've sat down with it and I said I should really, really just do this, and just keep on optimizing and getting efficiencies and scaling and making profits. But then I woke up one day and I said, it's not who I am, so I'm going to do a little of this and a little of that. And at the end of the day, you have to enjoy the journey, because which is my other thing. All this whole journey, I do not, and I do not, and I you'll have to trust me on this. I do not have goals that the company has to be, $5 million by now, $10 million by now, so many employees by now, so much profit by now, this business plan by now. It's I don't do it that way. So I want this to have impact. I want it to be meaningful to others, but also to myself, and hire people who I'd like to hang out with, and build something which is enjoyable and maybe not as big as it could have been had I been focused. But
So this might be a good time. This might be a good time, Navyug, to talk to you and have you share your story about the transition with us from
yeah,
QAI, which you were very successfully still do, but everything was great, going well, etc., etc. You decided you wanted to do something.
yeah,
Was it additional, separate, different? So please take us through that story. How did you kind of
yeah,
develop that bit by
yeah.
bit?
Yes. So QAI was running fine. It was it was doing just fine, um and yet it had been
Sorry, how
my
long back are we talking about?
so we
What
start it was
roughly what year are
incorporated
we talking about?
93. It was when it was formally incorporated. So almost 25 years plus had happened. Like I said, we set up in China, in Singapore, acquisition in London. By the way, we went back and acquired our parent company in USA. So that was another highlight. And so that whole journey was extremely wholesome, energizing. I loved every moment of it. And but this was process improvement, and but at the I was and have always been interested in design. And so one started to dabble with design and design thinking, and so we set up another brand called QGLUE to help companies to do design and innovation, and which was nice as well, and that was a fun foray. But the penny drop moment happened for me when I discovered the book Designing Your Life. And here I was, very, very a big votary or enthusiast, a design enthusiast. And it said, guess what? All the products, all the principles, tenets, and methods that we use for great products and service design, they have and we have repurposed for life design. That sounded very exciting. So I read the book and I said, wow, and a lot of what I've said and other experiences um, all kind of mapped to the principles and tenets of life design framework or design thinking. And I said, this is valuable. It's worked for me. And I have stories and anecdotes and lived experiences around each of these things. And I think this is a powerful framework. Then I dug in more and I saw that, hey, it's a bestseller course at Stanford. And then I dug in more and I saw that they're offering it in other universities, hundreds of them around the world. Largely the Western world are doing it. So that's when I said, okay, um, you know, while the companies are running, I'm going to go back to being in the arena, which means I have to learn this, study. So it was really deja vu and going back 30 years, doing the study, getting on the field, standing up there to deliver, not sitting in some ivory tower and learning all over again. So in some sense, it was a journey of self-discovery. So I did the Stanford's, coach designing your life coach certification. Then I did the training. Then I became a Stanford educator so that I'm able to teach at universities. Then I went through their facilitator certification that I'm able to teach the workshops and programs. And with it, I did a whole lot of self-study. Now, it came at a very interesting time of my life, which, and I'll talk about, and I think, Atul, and we've talked or you've mentioned it, but, Arthur Brooks' work called From Strength to Strength. And I hadn't realized it, but that's what was happening. After a certain age, we have two intelligences. The fluid intelligence serves us well at our younger age. We're smart, we can process data, we're innovative, and we're sharp. With age, that curve starts to come down. And the new intelligence kicks in, and that's called the crystallized intelligence. So the first curve is the innovation curve, and the second curve is the wisdom curve. And it's what he says, and this happened accidentally, but now that I read it, what has happened is one jumped from, to some extent, the fluid intelligence curve to the crystallized intelligence curve. from being the innovator and the sharp young entrepreneur to the other curve, which is around wisdom, teaching, counsel, and connecting the dots. And I think, and the research shows that decline in the first curve happens for all of us. And for example, the podcast that you're doing now is a classic example of crystallized intelligence curve. One is using, and what the teaching that I'm doing now is the crystallized intelligence. We're using our life experiences to put structure and wisdom and connecting the dots, and that's what we're really good at now. By good at, I mean that's the faculty that's right. So I think a lot of us, you, me, all of us are moving to some extent to the second curve of life. And the moment we realize it, rather than feel any decline, one should start making prototypes and moving towards the second curve, because now we're really well positioned for that. So I double down on that. And I just think that teaching, connecting dots, wisdom, counsel, sharing experiences, sharing stories with youngsters, with adults, whatever I can share based on my own lived experiences, married with the framework from Stanford, married with other research and study, could be of some value, some value. So that's where I've shifted. Now, let's see how well that goes.
I'd like to talk a bit more about this penny drop. I find it very fascinating. For some of our viewers who may not be knowing what penny drop is, it's really the aha moment. It's a light bulb moment. Now you talked about it when he wrote about reading that book, Designing Your Life. He talked about it earlier as well, some penny drop moment that he had. And now I was telling you earlier about my son who was in Ashoka, where you teach, and he had a penny drop moment reading a book called This Changes Everything, and that's when he got interested in climate change.
Nice.
I think what it tells us is that, are you expanding your horizon? Are you reading enough books? Are you some guest said that he saw a movie and it was a penny drop moment for him, isn't it? But I think we can have all this information, because today we are living in a world of too much information. The real question is, does the penny drop for you? And that's the question I keep asking my audience.
Yes.
When I do workshops, does the penny drop for you? And I think it goes back to self-awareness. Yeah. So really, this is a big learning for all our viewers. I mean, of course, be open to more information, but ask yourself, is the penny really dropping for me?
And I'll add to that, Suman. I totally agree with you. And I'm just going to add and take forward what you said.
Yeah.
To me, it's self-awareness, awareness, and the penny drop moment. And I call that a bias to awareness. Okay, we're always trying to be more self-aware.
Yeah.
But with it, the critical and maybe even more important part is the second bit, which is bias to action.
Yeah.
Now, we can have all the awareness we want, but if we are not going to take those small steps forward and act, then it doesn't get anywhere.
Absolutely.
So one of the big, life design philosophies in my personal experience, I would say, is whatever it is, the analogy again is, if you don't swing the bat, you're not putting runs on the board.
Yeah.
So we can keep analyzing the ball and the pitch and the conditions, but then we should not. Then you're a Harsha Bhogle. You're not a Virat Kohli.
Yep.
And therefore, so they do their study, they work on the nets, they look at their videos, but finally, value gets created through action. And I've seen in my experience with working with a lot of the adults in the workshops and coaching and outside, is we might end up doing a lot of awareness stuff, but without prototyping some actions and without moving forward and taking actions and building the courage and building the creative confidence and building some courage and success, value creation doesn't happen. A lot of us have the habit of reading and attending and surfing and being aware, But I think the real value is when you couple that with bias to action. Small action also works, but that's what's so,
Bias to action. Yeah, I like that, bias to action.
yeah.
Um, when I look at your journey, Navyug, one thing I find very interesting is, to borrow a phrase from this book, A Whole New Mind, that I'm reading. He calls it L directed and R directed, essentially meaning left brain and right brain, right? So the QAI stuff, OPEX, process stuff, that's very left brained. Um, Design is kind of in between. And then if you look in something like DIL, it's extremely right brain directed, right?
Nice.
So was that transition, that's also a very interesting transition going from left brain to right brain.
Nice.
Was that transition also deliberate, or how did that happen?
Yes, lovely. Great question. And you know what? I was doing QAI, but I was not the delivery person. I was not the
Okay.
left brain guy.
Hmm.
Even building QAI, I was trying, because that's, I think, my wiring. I was the creative entrepreneur rather than the knowledgeable consultant looking at data and solving the customer's problems. So in some sense, I was an imposter. In some sense, I
Not
wasn't the,
imposter. You were the principal. You were not the teacher.
I don't know. I was like, okay, all this looking at the data of defects from a piece of code and analyzing how the bugs are, and looking at processes and all was in some sense not me. And yet QAI was this, actually the leading consulting firm in this space. And to the extent that we built it, and I'm very proud of the team, this is really, they were the ones in front of the customer. We were, for till today, we are 30% more expensive than KPMG, who we compete with on a daily basis. So from then till
Wow.
today, for 20 years, we have remained 30% more expensive and gotten away with it because of the great team. So in some sense, I was an imposter. Um, and then we set up the design thing. Although I'm really fond of design, but I'm not a designer through education and craft. I'm not
Yeah.
a graphic designer or an interior designer or a product designer. So again, I was the imposter there, but
Yeah.
I was also the entrepreneur. And then came DYL, and I said, no, boss, life mein imposter nahi. One is not an imposter in life. I've lived life, so I'm going to have stories to tell. So actually, after all these years, I don't feel an imposter.
But maybe I'm thinking we can also link it to that crystallized intelligence that you talked about. As we grow older, we are starting to connect the dots. You end
Yes,
up in a very different space.
yes,
And maybe crystallized intelligence is more art directed because
it
you're
is.
really looking at the big
It
picture.
is. It is. It is. It's art directed. It's wisdom. It's connecting of dots, and it's looking at patterns. It's looking at emotion, aspiration, values, everything. It's the bigger picture stuff. So certainly, and that's why I'm loving it so much.
It
So
completely
yeah,
resonates with me. Yeah.
yeah. It's um, in the end, I just believe that while we should have meaning and purpose in life, while we should be serious about stuff, it's the dichotomy of do all that and yet be completely like, life is meaningless, have fun, and can the two coexist? Because if you're only doing that, I think it gets boring. If you're only doing this, we get
Yeah, yeah,
flippant and it's too
yeah.
shallow. And
Which is where the
again, the
Fin Club
dichotomy
comes in
of
as well.
and, it's the dichotomy of and. Can we be passionate and be dispassionate? Can we think life is meaningless and do very meaningful stuff?
Mm.
Can we be task oriented and yet be relationship oriented? If I may urge any viewer to just look at the possibility, just entertain the possibility of having all the ands in your life. We have a way of figuring them out. What we do not believe in that is that we can do both. The day we wake up and say, I can have both, it starts to, it starts to happen.
Tell me, Navyug, when you went through the journey, you decided you wanted to explore the DYL process, and this whole journey of going into a completely new space, you're suddenly, from being the expert in running QAI global, um, you're now, a child in a new space. How did you emotionally handle with that? What was the, I mean, it's one thing, you're always a learner, you're a lifelong learner. It's very clear from our conversation, you've always been like that. And as an entrepreneur, you have to embrace lifelong learning anyway, pretty much always. But still, how did you kind of deal with that emotions of I know everything versus I know nothing?
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough. Um, I didn't know how much I knew, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right? It was also, my identity was at risk again. I was, QAI has been reasonably successful and one's reasonably respected. Now here I am, putting myself out there. So there was this, um, one could lose some self-esteem, one could lose some amount of identity, one could, if it didn't work out well, people would say, oh, because, you just went there because now you have nothing else to do. The students could say, what the hell, because I'm not a academic. So it was, in the beginning, there was a lot of that thinking and apprehension. My personal view is that, we are all challenged at various times in our lives, and we must be and should be, and it's great to be. The thing that I am able to do is to park the emotion and say that if it doesn't work, it's okay. I tried. So to me, that I tried my best is far more important than even succeed. So that's always, kind of guided me along. I mean, I could walk out of that saying, okay, I wasn't good enough, or, but I tried my best. So one thing that's drives me a lot is this thought. If I've tried my best, I can deal with it. So yeah, there was apprehension, but I wasn't dysfunctional about it. I just said, I will try my best, and then we'll see. And that's what I did. And then once you try your best, you do end up doing a reasonable job, and then you know that now you can get better and better. So to me, it's the frame of, the outcome. As they even say this for kids today, right? Don't talk of, the growth mindset kind of thing. Don't talk of the outcome, talk about the effort. And I have that for myself. I don't really care about the outcome. And I'm telling you this with all honesty, I care a lot about if I've put in the effort. And that itself to me is satisfaction. So I put in a heck of a lot of effort. Even for this new foray, you cannot imagine how much effort I've put in. And you know, again, and I get a lot of flack from my family. I've gone underground for a few years. I've studied and gone back to taking, reading and studying. And but finally I just feel that if I put in the effort, it's fine. So that's my hack, and that's the way I reframe it.
Do you also find that you find the efforts themselves satisfying, and that's
Yes,
that's a
yes,
self realization and
that's
awareness as well?
absolutely, Atul. Absolutely. The moment we can get to that state, it serves me very well. The journey is the goal. The effort is the reward or the satisfaction. The learnings and resilience you build is in itself the reward. So to me, the effort and the pursuit of excellence is in itself the reward. Now, I would really like it if I was adding value and people appreciated it, and who doesn't, but it wouldn't crush me. So you're right, I
I
totally.
think in a way I link it to the dichotomy of exploit and explore again. I mean,
Yeah.
once I am good at something, I want to exploit that more and more. And if I do that, I might get very successful, at least success from the way others see it, more fame, more money, more
Yeah.
whatever. But what I'm not effectively doing is stopping to explore,
Yes.
isn't it? So it's a function of both of those. And that
Yes.
probably explains why a lot of successful people, a lot of people in the corporate world who are quite successful, uh, they might think of it, they can deal with it cognitively, but they can't deal with it emotionally, which is why they never get off the highway, using your metaphor.
Yes. Yes.
I think it's also related, Suman, to we had a conversation with Pooja, if you remember, and she was talking about that, validation is very external when you're in a job,
Yeah.
whereas on this kind of a journey in the post the transition, it becomes far more internal, far more, and like what you're saying, that I make the efforts and I'd
Yeah.
like to be appreciated,
Yeah.
but that's not the reason I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Very interesting parallel comes to my mind. It's like, when you're traveling to a new place, there are typically two ways of doing it. One, you have a checklist approach, must see so places, da, 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 da. The other is you go and seep in the experience, enjoy it. You may do some of the scenic places. Now, why do you do the checklist one? Because you will come back from France and Paris, and people will ask, Eiffel Tower dekha, and you're like, Eiffel Tower, where was that? So, you have the checklist is for external validation. You have to tell people you did tick, 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 tick. Whereas you may not have really seeped in. So it's a very interesting, kind
Yeah.
of parallel kind of thing there.
And yeah, the whole thing around extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation, right? And Daniel
Yeah.
Pink's work again speaks to this. So the
Yes.
moment the needle starts shifting towards the intrinsic, which is what happens in latter years of life, right? In the earlier
Yeah.
years, we are seeking validation. We have to prove it to everyone. And there's a lot of the external
True.
rewards. In the second innings, I think people who have moved more and more towards intrinsic motivation and things that give us intrinsic motivation are better served. And that can be a conscious journey of moving towards intrinsic motivations and meaning, purpose, autonomy, and all those other things, and getting off the hedonic treadmill, or the because we
Mm.
know that
Mm.
we'll the brain will come back and do hedonic adaptation, and you'll feel the same. So what really stays is these ones with intrinsic motivation. So, and I think with age, and all we can do is remind the younger generation that this is bound to happen. So start early and just be more aware. I'm not in any way telling them to not go after accomplishments. Of course we must
Mm.
go after accomplishments, of course we must strive, of course we must be strivers, but we must also be aware that there's something called the striver's curse. And the more you strive, the later on in life, if the graph doesn't keep going up, you feel very low. So there is
Mm.
the striver's curse, there is the hedonic treadmill, there is this desensitization of these dopamine hits that happen, there is lack of meaning and purpose. And while we're aware of all that, we should always, of course, be achievers, and do all the other stuff, but do it for a reason, without being just feeling stuck. So the whole thing is a life by design and not by default. And I think we can do all these other things like accumulating fame and money and all, as long as it's not owning us, but we are owning it. And I think there's that shift in the mindset, has, and a lot of the people I worked with, that shift has really helped. Now they're still doing what they're doing, but with a whole different sense of being at peace with it and not feeling stuck or driven by it. Our identity gets so fixated or fixed with a certain, let's say, vocation. And when you retire, or when some people are fired, or someone doesn't want to continue anymore, or any disability, whatever, with it goes the identity.
Yeah.
And when you lose identity, that becomes very stressful. So, we have to build, or at least start to dabble and develop some of these other identities, and therefore have a portfolio of identities. So as we move into our second innings, as we move to crystallize intelligence, some of those identities are already starting to get formed. Is easier.
I think there's a paradox there also with success. The more successful one is, the more
Yeah.
difficult it is to move away. I
Yes.
get reminded of Steve Jobs, the brilliant quote. He said, the heaviness of being a successful person was replaced by the lightness of being an entrepreneur. But
Yeah.
that's not when he quit. That's when he was fired, right? So
Mm.
sometimes because you're so successful, he didn't quit by himself.
Yeah.
He knew everything, but it's so difficult to walk away. But when he got fired, he had that reflection and he said, so why
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
stressing on this is, while we know all of this cognitively, it's extremely difficult to do it in real life,
Mm.
right? And I think that's where trying to focus more and
Yeah.
see, how does the penny drop for you? For me, one thing is clear, that people who make that shift have a very high thirst for knowledge.
Yeah.
They're constantly exploring, learning, and of course being vulnerable, because the moment you try something new, you're vulnerable again. Even
Suman,
when you're confronted by difficult questions in the classroom from
yeah.
bright kids in ISB or Ashoka, I'm sure it's making you vulnerable as well. And
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
you don't have the answers. Maybe you say, no, I need to get back to you.
Yep. Totally. And this whole word called vulnerability, if we unpack it, what you've just said is huge. Actually, it's not just a word. And so as we are moving towards the next graph or the next phase of life, second innings, crystallize, whatever you want to call it, but vulnerability, and Brené Brown's work, she's done extensive research on this, right? Vulnerability means putting yourself out there, something that I've been talking about and design talks about a lot also, right? Vulnerability,
Mm.
actually creativity comes from vulnerability. And courage also, small steps of courage, or courage happens through vulnerability. So vulnerability is so key to moving that journey forward towards this newer things. And it comes down, and yeah, if you have the courage, you'll be vulnerable, but if you are vulnerable, you'll have the courage. Now someone has to help you break that cycle.
So, Navyug, it's been really fascinating to listen to these stories in your journey. When you reflect back, uh, what are the things that you would have done differently? And is there things that you would still do the same?
Yeah, and I alluded to it, and I think I would have done differently is, for some of the things, some of the times, hung in there and focused a little bit more than I did. I think, yeah, life is an adventure and it's an exploration, but you have to double down at times and stay, let the anchor drop and let the ship stay in the port for a while. And I would, there are certain initiatives which were amazing initiatives. I just think that the seduction of trying something new took me in that direction, and one got seduced, and you have to also um you know anchor and stay on a port for some time. So I would do that differently. um
That's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, while I'm a great one for exploration and discovery, I think if I had to do it all over again, I would continue to explore and discover, but I would do a little bit more of staying put.
And in your spirit of, and you would not
Not
explore, you would
explore.
also explore,
Also,
and you would do that as well. So it
yes,
would be, it would be an and not an or. So it's
it
not,
will
it's
be an
something
and.
additional in that sense.
No, it would be an and for sure. So to answer your question, what would I do all over again? Explore, and have some more focus. But if you put a gun to my head and said, you have to choose one, then I would do explore all over again. But no one puts a gun to one's head, and so my biggest learning is just double
Yeah.
down on some stuff. And including your financials, including health, and you have to give time to stuff. You can't be having an adventure all the time.
Seeing it from a perspective of the viewer listener, what's the kind of advice you would give? And you are talking to people of all age groups and diverse backgrounds through DYL. So I think we can spend some time on you giving advice, and you may choose to give different types of advice to different age groups: people who are
Nice.
early in their careers, people who are
Yep.
in the middle of their career, people who are in their 50s and coming towards the end of their career. So feel
Nice.
free to kind of give different
Okay.
types of advice.
Cool. Okay. So here's one that I learned. This is for the slightly younger lot, the professionals who are starting out, and this was by a workshop or a seminar I was attending of Phil Crosby. Phil Crosby, he was this quality guru, blah blah blah. Won't get into his details, but one thing that really stuck with me then, and this was, I don't know how many years ago. I was probably 28 or something. And he said, I was a clerk and then I rose and then I rose and then I rose. I was nobody and I became vice president of IT&T, and there's a Phil Crosby College of Quality, blah, 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 blah. He was hugely successful, celebrated. He said, I had one mantra in life, and this is really for the younger people. It applies down the ages, but he said, be reliable and be useful. He said, my boss would give me a job. I would be reliable. That means he could depend on me if I'd made a commitment, blah, blah, blah. And I would add a little value. I'd be useful. Now he'd give me something more to do, and I would be reliable and I'd be useful. And just this one mantra kept me going. I would say for the mid-managed, my advice would be to pause and reflect, because to a large extent we are going and we keep moving, and again, as Brené Brown said, that we have been so busy that truth hasn't been able to catch up. So allow truth to catch up and pause and reflect. And so for people in the 30s or 40s, pause and reflect. What are your values? What lights you up? Take some time off in just self-awareness, and asking yourself through that pause and reflect, you know does this look meaningful, and is it purposeful, and am I feeling fulfilled? Not am I just successful, am I fulfilled? And for the people in the latter years, I think there's again an interesting metaphor, and this comes from Arthur Brooks, which I like a lot, is the metaphor of a canvas versus a metaphor of a block of stone. Your life can be a metaphor, the canvas metaphor, where we are adding color and adding stuff, right? And adding more and more to it. But in the latter years of one's life, he says, actually, it's about simplifying and taking away and chipping things off. So that's a blank canvas is a work of art waiting to happen, but a block of stone is a work of art waiting to happen. So the latter years of our life, we have to chip away stuff and throw it away, and you're left with a work of art by chipping away. But in the early years, it was by adding to color to the canvas. So I would
That's very
say that,
nice. That's very nice
yeah,
indeed. Yeah.
yeah,
That's
just
a great way of looking at it. Yeah.
simplify and get down to what's core, what gives meaning, purpose, and relationships, and everything about the why, like you said, Atul. So chip
And
away.
I
Dig
find
into
that
your why.
an interesting disagreement I often have with the young people that I interact with within the business or otherwise, is that I'm always focused on thinking about what can I take away from this to make it better. Design very often is to take things away, whatever's not required, right?
Yes.
And whereas people, younger people say, "Nee, nee, Atul, let's add this red thing here, let's add this thing here, it'll make look better, and that, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, maybe it does, I could be wrong, but there's a disconnect in the thought process, and that probably is this is where it's coming from. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
So
must say at this point that it's been amazing learning for all of us. I personally learned a lot in just in terms of frameworks, quotes, books, metaphors. We talked quite a few of metaphors, and by the way, metaphors can be penny dropping because metaphors comes from the right side of the brain. It's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
processed at the language center. So that's very, very powerful. This thing of bias to awareness, and because
Yeah.
ultimately we're talking about awareness, but I think what the way you put it, it has to be supplemented with bias to action. And to me,
Hmm.
that's about risk taking. That's about vulnerability. And I think those are the qualities we need to imbibe. Um, Maybe this anchoring of the ship reminded me of one quote which is linked to that, which I found very powerful. And it said, "A ship is safest in the harbor, but
Yeah.
it was never meant to be in the harbor. It was
Nice. I
meant
love
to,
that one.
sail the
That
high
one.
seas."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and I thought that was very powerful. So sailing the high seas is about risk taking, is about vulnerability. So yeah, so I just wanted to mention that it's been an really, really very fulfilling.
Thank you
Very
so
true, Suman. And I've taken a lot more notes in this episode than I ever do, and it might have looked like I was distracted typing and all, but I didn't want to miss the thought, because it's just, it triggers so many other thoughts. You start thinking in different directions. So great learning. Thank you so much, Navyug. This is a great place to kind of wrap up this episode. We really appreciate your time. And if there's any closing words that you have, please feel free. Suman,
Thank
anything from you?
you. No,
Nothing
no,
from my side. No.
yes, no, I have to say thank you. And I truly enjoyed it. And, you know, it was so amazing because now when I look at the watch with the clock right here, just time just went by. So it was so engaging talking to both of you, and got me thinking, and wonderful conversations. Thank you for your contributions. I'm taking away so much of learnings myself. Wonderful, lovely. Thank you.
We hope to stay connected and learn more from you. Thanks a lot, Navyug. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye bye.
Bye.